The dust from the trail still clung to Morgan Steele's coat when he first saw her sitting alone in the corner of the saloon, her eyes downcast, and her fingers nervously tracing the rim of an untouched glass of whiskey. It was 1876 in the frontier town of Redemption Creek, Colorado, a place where fortunes were made and souls were lost with equal speed. Morgan had been riding for 3 days straight, his body aching from the saddle and his mind weary from months of solitude on the cattle drive. He wasn't looking for company that night, just a drink and a meal that didn't taste of trail dust. But something about the woman in the blue calico dress caught his eye, something in the way she held herself, dignified yet afraid, like a deer ready to bolt at the slightest sound. The saloon buzzed with the typical evening crowd, card players cursing their luck, miners spending their day's earnings, and the occasional burst of raucous laughter. But she sat apart from it all, an island of stillness in a sea of chaos. Morgan ordered his whiskey and found himself drifting toward her table, his spurs jingling softly with each step. He stopped a respectful distance away, removing his hat. "Evening, madam. Mind if I join you? Seems every other table's full up." It wasn't true. There were at least 3 empty tables, but it was the only line he could think of that didn't sound like a proposition. She looked up, and Morgan found himself staring into the deepest green eyes he'd ever seen. Her auburn hair was pinned neatly beneath a modest hat, but a few rebellious strands had escaped to frame her face. "I would prefer to be alone, sir," she said, her voice carrying a hint of something Eastern in its pronunciation. Morgan nodded, replaced his hat, and turned to leave when he noticed 3 men at the bar watching her with predatory interest. One of them, a burly fellow with a scar running down his cheek, nudged his companions and nodded in her direction. Without thinking, Morgan pulled out the chair opposite hers and sat down anyway. "Name's Morgan Steele," he said quietly, "and I think you might be safer with me sitting here than alone." She followed his gaze to the men at the bar and visibly tensed. "Olivia Valentine," she replied after a moment, her voice barely audible over the piano playing in the corner. "And I don't need saving, Mr. Steele." Morgan didn't press the point. He simply sat there, nursing his whiskey, creating a barrier between Olivia and whatever trouble those men might represent. They didn't speak much that first night. Morgan ordered food and offered to have the barkeep bring her a plate, which she declined. As the hours passed, the men at the bar eventually lost interest and staggered out into the night. When Olivia finally stood to leave, Morgan rose as well. "Where are you staying, Miss Valentine?" "At Mrs. Whitaker's boarding house," she replied, gathering her small handbag. "I'll walk you there." "That won't be necessary. It's no trouble. These streets get dangerous after dark." She hesitated, then nodded curtly. They walked in silence through the dusty streets, the moon casting long shadows across their path. When they reached the white picket fence of the boarding house, Olivia turned to him. "Thank you, Mr. Steele. Though I still maintain I could have managed on my own." Morgan tipped his hat. "Never doubted it for a minute, Miss Valentine. Good night." The next evening found Morgan back at the same saloon, telling himself he was just there for the decent stew they served. But his eyes immediately sought out the corner table, and there she was again, just as alone as the night before. This time, he didn't ask permission. He simply sat down across from her and placed his hat on the empty chair beside him. "Evening, Miss Valentine." She looked up, surprise flickering across her features before they settled back into their guarded expression. "Mr. Steele, I see you've appointed yourself my guardian." "Just being neighborly," he replied with a half-smile. "Redemption Creek isn't always kind to newcomers." "And what makes you think I'm a newcomer?" "The way you hold your fork. The way you sit. The fact that your boots aren't covered in 3 inches of Colorado dust yet." He shrugged. "I notice things." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "A regular detective?" "No, madam. Just a cowboy who's seen his share of the world." That night, they spoke a little more. He learned she had arrived on the eastbound stage just 4 days prior. She learned he worked as a trail boss for the Rockingham Ranch outside of town. Neither shared why they were really there or what had brought them to this remote corner of the frontier. Again, he walked her back to the boarding house. Again, they parted with formal goodbyes. On the 3rd night, he brought her a book, a dog-eared copy of The Last of the Mohicans, that he kept in his saddlebag. "Thought you might like something to read," he said, sliding it across the table. "Gets lonely sometimes, being new in town." Olivia ran her fingers over the worn cover. You enjoy Cooper's work, Mr. Steele? When there's time for reading, which isn't often on the trail. She opened the book, noting the careful handwriting on the inside cover. M. Steele, 1868. She looked up at him. You've had this a long time. Got me through some rough nights, he admitted. Thought it might do the same for you. Something in her expression softened. That's very kind. They talked about books that night. She had read widely Dickens, Eliot, Hawthorne. He had fewer titles under his belt, but had read each one multiple times, absorbing them deeply. For the first time, Morgan heard her laugh when he described misunderstanding a passage in Moby Dick as a young man. It was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds, that laugh, and Morgan found himself wanting to hear it again. The pattern continued. Each night, Morgan would finish his work at the ranch and ride into town. Each night, he would find Olivia at the same corner table. Each night, he would sit with her, their conversations gradually lengthening, though she remained careful about revealing anything too personal. By the end of the week, the other patrons hardly gave them a second glance. They had become a fixture, the tall, weathered cowboy and the refined lady in the corner, talking quietly as the chaos of the saloon swirled around them. On the seventh night, Morgan arrived to find Olivia's table empty. A cold feeling settled in his stomach as he scanned the room. He was about to leave and check the boarding house when the saloon doors swung open, and she walked in, her face flushed from the evening chill. Their eyes met, and for the first time, she smiled at him without reservation. She made her way to their table, for it had become theirs, somehow, and sat down. I thought perhaps you had grown tired of our arrangement, Morgan said, trying to keep his voice light. Mrs. Whitaker needed help with her accounts, Olivia explained. I lost track of time. You're good with numbers? I was a teacher back east, she said, then looked surprised at her own admission. Morgan nodded, filing away this new piece of information. Teaching's important work. It was, she said, and there was a sadness in her voice that made Morgan want to reach across the table and take her hand. He didn't. Instead, he changed the subject. The cattle drive starts next week. I'll be gone for a while. Olivia's eyes widened slightly. How long is a while? Month, maybe 2. Taking the herd up to Wyoming. She nodded, looking down at her hands. I see. Will you still be here when I get back? He hadn't meant to ask the question so directly, but there it was, hanging between them. Olivia hesitated. I don't know. I haven't decided how long I'm staying in Redemption Creek. Morgan wanted to ask more why she had come, what she was running from, for he was certain she was running from something, where she intended to go. But he respected her privacy. Everyone in the West had a past they'd rather not discuss. Well, if you're still here, I'll buy you dinner at the hotel restaurant when I get back, he said. They serve proper food there. Tablecloths and everything. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That would be nice. They talked about safer topics for the rest of the evening: the unseasonable weather, the new schoolhouse being built on the edge of town, the latest shipment of goods that had arrived at the general store. When it came time to leave, Morgan walked her to the boarding house as usual. But tonight, at the gate, Olivia turned to him with an intensity in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Be careful on the drive, Mr. Steele. Always am, Miss Valentine. She bit her lip, seeming to debate something internally. Then, to Morgan's surprise, she reached out and briefly touched his arm. Good night, then. Good night, he replied, his skin warm where her fingers had been. He watched her disappear into the boarding house, wondering what had changed tonight and why it felt like they'd said more in those brief moments at the gate than in all their previous conversations combined. The cattle drive was brutal. Unseasonable rains had swollen the rivers, making crossings treacherous. 2 hands were injured, one seriously, when a section of the herd spooked during a thunderstorm. The buyer in Wyoming tried to renegotiate the price at the last minute, leading to tense standoffs that Morgan had to navigate with careful diplomacy. Through it all, during the long nights when he took his turn at watch, Morgan found his thoughts drifting back to Redemption Creek, to a corner table in a noisy saloon, to green eyes and a laugh that reminded him of sunshine. He wondered if Olivia would still be there when he returned. He wondered what had brought her west. He wondered what she might be running from. Most of all, he wondered why he cared so much. It took nearly 7 weeks before Morgan and his men drove the remaining horses back into the Rockingham Ranch. They were exhausted, filthy, and ready for real beds. The men immediately headed for the bunkhouse, but Morgan took only enough time to clean up before saddling a fresh horse and riding toward town. The sun was setting as he approached Redemption Creek, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The streets were quiet, most folks already at home for supper. Morgan tied his horse outside the saloon, his heart beating faster than he cared to admit. He pushed through the swinging doors and scanned the room. The corner table was empty. Morgan tried to quell his disappointment as he ordered a whiskey and took a seat where he could watch the door. An hour passed, then another. He was about to give up when the saloon doors opened and Olivia walked in. She was wearing a dress he hadn't seen before, deep blue, with a modest lace collar. Her hair was arranged differently too, with fewer pins constraining it. She paused just inside the entrance, her eyes searching the room until they found him. The smile that spread across her face made the 7 weeks of hardship fade away in an instant. Morgan stood as she approached, suddenly conscious of his trail-worn appearance despite his best efforts to clean up. "You're back," she said simply. "Just rode in today." He pulled out her chair. "Wasn't sure you'd still be here." Olivia sat down, arranging her skirts. "I found employment. Mrs. Whitaker needed permanent help with her books, and the new schoolhouse needed someone to teach the older children. So you're staying in Redemption Creek." She met his eyes. "For now." Morgan signaled to the barkeep for 2 drinks. "I believe I promised you dinner at the hotel restaurant." "You did," she agreed. "Though perhaps not tonight. You look like you could use some rest after your journey." Morgan chuckled. "That obvious, is it?" "Only to someone who's been looking forward to your return," she said softly, then flushed as if she hadn't meant to admit so much. A warm feeling spread through Morgan's chest. "Tomorrow night, then? 7 o'clock. I would like that." They fell back into their rhythm easily, talking late into the evening. Olivia told him about her new teaching position, about the children in her class, about the improvements she was helping Mrs. Whitaker make to the boarding house. Morgan shared stories from the trail, carefully editing out the more dangerous moments. As the saloon began to empty, Morgan realized how much he had missed these conversations. Out on the trail, surrounded by men he'd known for years, he had still felt a loneliness that only seemed to ease now, sitting across from Olivia. When he walked her home that night, something had shifted between them. There was an ease, a comfort that hadn't been there before. At the boarding house gate, Olivia turned to him with a softness in her expression. "I'm glad you made it back safely, Morgan." It was the first time she had used his given name, and the sound of it in her voice made his heart skip. "So am I, Olivia," he replied. "So am I." The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Redemption Creek, which wasn't saying much by Eastern standards, but they had made an effort. White tablecloths covered the tables, and actual glass windows looked out onto the main street. The menu offered more than the standard fare of beans and beef, and they even had a selection of wines. Morgan arrived early, wearing his only good shirt and a clean jacket that felt stiff after so long on the trail. He had asked for a table by the window and waited nervously, turning his hat in his hands. When Olivia entered, several heads turned. She wore a forest green dress that complemented her eyes, and her hair was arranged in an elegant style that framed her face perfectly. She spotted Morgan and made her way to the table, her movements graceful despite the obvious scrutiny of the other diners. Morgan stood and pulled out her chair. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, a flush of color rising to her cheeks. "You clean up quite well yourself, Mr. Steele." "I thought we were past Mr. Steele," he said with a smile. "Force of habit," she admitted. "Morgan." They ordered roast beef for him, chicken for her, and a bottle of wine to share. As they waited for their food, Morgan found himself wanting to know more about her, to understand the mystery that surrounded Olivia Valentine. "May I ask you something?" he said after they had been served. She looked up from her plate. "Of course. What brought you to Redemption Creek?" "It's not exactly on the way to anywhere." Olivia took a sip of her wine, considering her answer. "I needed a fresh start. Somewhere far from Boston." "Boston?" Morgan raised his eyebrows. "That's a long way to travel for a fresh start." "Some situations require considerable distance," she said quietly. Morgan nodded, not pushing further. "I understand that better than most." "And what about you?" she asked. "What brought you to Colorado?" "The war," he said simply. "After Appomattox, I couldn't go back to Virginia." Too many ghosts. Headed west and never looked back. You fought for the Confederacy? Not proudly, Morgan admitted. I was young and foolish, and by the time I understood what we were really fighting for, I was in too deep to desert. Lost my family's farm anyway. Olivia studied him. The past has a way of shaping us, doesn't it? It does. But it doesn't have to define us. Their conversation deepened as the evening progressed. Olivia spoke of her love for teaching, how she found purpose in opening young minds to literature and mathematics. Morgan shared stories of his travels across the frontier, the beauty and harshness of the landscapes he'd seen. By the time they finished their meal, the restaurant had nearly emptied. They walked slowly back to the boarding house, the night air cool around them. "Thank you for dinner," Olivia said as they reached the familiar gate. "It was lovely to eat something that wasn't stew or beans." Morgan chuckled. "My pleasure. Though I'll have you know Mrs. Jenkins at the ranch makes a fine stew." Olivia smiled, then grew serious. "Morgan, may I ask you something now?" "Anything. Why did you sit with me that first night?" "The truth." Morgan considered his answer carefully. "I saw something in you, a kindred spirit, maybe. Someone carrying a burden they didn't want to share. And yes, I was concerned about those men at the bar, but it was more than that. And now, why do you still sit with me night after night?" His eyes met hers in the moonlight. "Because every evening I spend with you makes the day worthwhile. Because your laugh makes me forget every hardship I've endured. Because when I was out on that trail, all I could think about was getting back to that corner table in the saloon." Olivia's breath caught. For a moment, Morgan thought he had said too much, pushed too far. Then she reached out and took his hand. "I've been running for so long," she whispered. "It's exhausting." "What are you running from, Olivia?" She looked down at their joined hands. "My husband died 2 years ago. Or at least, that's what I believed until I received a letter 6 months ago from a woman in Chicago. She was also married to him while he was married to me." Morgan's jaw tightened. "He had 2 wives? 3, that we know of." "The letter was from his second wife, warning me that he wasn't dead after all. He had faked his death when his schemes started to unravel, and now he was looking for me. For the money my father left me." "Is that why you came west?" "To hide." Olivia nodded. "I thought if I went far enough, used my maiden name. But I'm always looking over my shoulder, always afraid." Morgan gently squeezed her hand. "Does he know you're here?" "I don't think so. But Edmund is resourceful and determined." "Edmund Valentine," Morgan said, committing the name to memory. "If he shows up in Redemption Creek, he'll have me to deal with." Olivia looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I don't want to put you in danger." "I've faced worse odds," Morgan said softly, "and for far less important reasons." They stood there in the moonlight, hands clasped, as a new understanding formed between them. Finally, Olivia spoke. "Will you come by tomorrow?" "After my classes finish. I'll be here," Morgan promised. She squeezed his hand once more before letting go. "Good night, Morgan." "Good night, Olivia." As summer turned to fall, Morgan and Olivia settled into a new routine. He would finish his work at the ranch, then ride into town to meet her after her school day ended. Sometimes they would walk along the creek that gave the town its name. Other times, they would sit on the boarding house porch, talking until Mrs. Whitaker pointedly turned down the lamps inside. Every few days, they would still go to the saloon, sitting at their corner table, but now they sat side by side rather than across from each other. Morgan would occasionally rest his hand over hers on the table, a small gesture that spoke volumes in the public setting. Olivia gradually told Morgan more about her past, how she had met Edmund at a literary society meeting, how charming and intelligent he had seemed, how thoroughly he had deceived her. Morgan shared his own stories, the horrors he had witnessed during the war, his difficult journey west, the years of building a reputation as a reliable trail boss. They were healing each other, slowly, carefully, with each story exchanged and each quiet moment shared. One crisp October evening, as they sat on a fallen log by the creek watching the sunset reflect off the water, Morgan took Olivia's hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice uncommonly hesitant. "A dangerous pastime," she teased gently. He smiled. "The Rockingham has offered me a permanent position. Foreman of the whole operation. No more long cattle drives." "Morgan, that's wonderful. You deserve it. There's more." He took a deep breath. "The position comes with the use of a house. A real house, not just a bunk in the quarters. 2 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, even a small study where you could keep your books. Olivia's eyes widened as she understood what he was suggesting. It's about 5 miles outside of town, Morgan continued. You could still teach if you wanted, though the ride would be longer. Or, he hesitated. The ranch owner's wife mentioned they've been wanting to start lessons for the hands who can't read. Said a qualified teacher would be welcome. Morgan, Olivia said softly, are you asking me to marry you? He met her gaze, his blue eyes earnest. I know it hasn't been that long, and you have your reasons to be cautious. But yes, Olivia Valentine, I am asking you to be my wife. To share that house, and whatever future we can build together. Olivia was quiet for so long that Morgan began to worry he had misread everything between them. Then she spoke, her voice trembling slightly. I'm still legally married, Morgan. Even if Edmund is a criminal and a liar, in the eyes of the law, I spoke with Judge Harrison last week. Morgan interrupted gently. Given the circumstances, the fraud, the multiple wives, he believes you have grounds for annulment. Said he'd handle the paperwork himself. Tears filled Olivia's eyes. You've thought of everything. I've tried, Morgan admitted. But there's one thing I can't know for certain. What's that? Whether you feel the same way I do. Whether you could see yourself building a life with me. Olivia reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. When I first came to Redemption Creek, I was so afraid. Every shadow seemed threatening, every stranger a potential danger. Then you sat down at my table and just stayed. Night after night. Morgan turned his face to kiss her palm. I couldn't stay away. At first, I thought you wanted something from me, like all the others. But you never pushed, never demanded. You just were there. Steady. Present. She took a shaky breath. The night before you left for the cattle drive, when I touched your arm at the gate, I realized something. What was that? I realized I was safe with you. Her voice broke on the words. For the first time in years, I felt truly safe. And that terrified me almost as much as Edmund did. Morgan pulled her closer. You are safe with me, Olivia. Always. I know, she whispered. And yes, Morgan Steele, I will marry you. I will share that house and whatever future we can build. Because I love you, and I'm tired of running. Morgan's face broke into a smile so bright it rivaled the setting sun. He leaned forward and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Olivia Valentine, and I promise you won't ever have to run again. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church on the edge of town. Judge Harrison had worked quickly on the annulment, eager to right the wrong that had been done to Olivia. Mrs. Whitaker hosted a small reception at the boarding house, and the following day, Morgan took Olivia to their new home on the Rocking M. The house wasn't grand by Eastern standards, but to Olivia, it was perfect. Solid log walls, a sturdy roof, and windows that looked out over the rolling pastures and distant mountains. Morgan had arranged for her books to be moved from the boarding house, and they were already arranged neatly in the study. That night, as they lay together in their new bed, Olivia rested her head on Morgan's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Are you happy? He asked, his fingers gently combing through her hair. Happier than I ever thought possible, she replied. Are you? I have everything I never knew I wanted, he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Olivia propped herself up to look at him. Even if Edmund somehow finds me, if he shows his face in Colorado, he'll regret it, Morgan said firmly. But I don't think he will. Men like that prey on the vulnerable. You're not vulnerable anymore, Olivia. You have me. You have friends in town. You have a community that respects you. She smiled, seeing the truth in his words. We have each other. Always, Morgan promised. Spring came to the Rocking M Ranch, bringing new calves, wildflowers, and the news that Olivia was expecting their first child. Morgan's joy knew no bounds as he prepared the second bedroom, building a cradle with his own hands and carving small wooden animals for the baby to play with. Olivia continued teaching, both at the schoolhouse in town and at the ranch, where several of the hands had proudly learned to write their own names under her patient instruction. As her condition became more evident, she cut back on the trips to town, focusing on the ranch lessons instead. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a summer thunderstorm roll across the distant mountains, Olivia took Morgan's hand and placed it on her rounded belly just as the baby kicked. Morgan's face lit up with wonder. Strong, like his mother. Or her father, Olivia countered with a smile. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lightning illuminate the darkening sky. I got a letter today, Olivia said finally. From that woman in Chicago, Edmund's other wife. Morgan tensed beside her. What did she say? Edmund was arrested in St. Louis. Apparently, he tried his scheme on the wrong woman, a judge's daughter. He'll be in prison for quite some time. The tension left Morgan's body. That's good news. It is, Olivia agreed. Though strangely, when I read it, I realized I hadn't thought about him in months. He doesn't have power over me anymore. Morgan put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. You're stronger than he ever knew. We're stronger together, she corrected. When you sat beside me night after night in that saloon, you weren't just protecting me from immediate danger. You were showing me that I could trust again, that I could build a new life. We built it together, Morgan said, kissing her temple. And we'll keep building it for years to come. As if in agreement, the baby kicked again beneath their joined hands. Olivia laughed, the sound still reminiscent of sunshine to Morgan's ears. I love you, Morgan Steele, she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. And I love you, Olivia Steele, he replied, his voice rich with promise. Now and always. The storm moved closer, but they remained on the porch, safe in each other's arms, watching the rain begin to fall on the land they now called home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But for now, this moment was enough, this shared peace between two people who had found in each other the safety and love they had both been seeking for so long.